Hello there, and welcome along to the Gardener Ben podcast. For those of you following along on social media, you may remember at the very beginning of November, I made the long and arduous drive all the way to Wolverhampton to attend one of David Austin Rose's bare root rose courses. Now, I know a lot of you that will know me very well will know Ben doesn't need to attend one of the bare root courses, but it's been such a long time since I managed to find the time to attend the nursery and have a look at the plant centre and walk around the show gardens. I thought it was really important that I made the trip. So at the beginning of November, I jumped in the car and drove the 5 hours all the way to Wolverhampton to attend one of David Austin Rose's bare root rose courses. They've now since stopped running the courses, but you can also now book yourself a pruning workshop, and they run from the 6th of January through to the 2nd of March. I had a wonderful day up at David Austin Rose's, and it was lovely to be amongst other like-minded rose enthusiasts, all attending the course. I had a good mooch around the show gardens and produced some media there. Also, a live stream of the walk around in the gardens is available for you to watch on YouTube at any time. There's some substantial work going on in the gardens, with many roses being removed, the soil being replaced and new roses being planted in large swathes all over the garden. So if you've been there before and think there's nothing for you to see that's new, I can assure you there's going to be plenty of change for next season. It was also incredibly interesting to see how many roses were still in flower at this time of year, and there was plenty still to see. I enjoyed a lovely lunch in the restaurant, and in the afternoon I had the pleasure in speaking to Liam, who is David Austin Rose's senior rose consultant. I hope that you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. I've known Liam for a very long time, but never managed to spend this much time speaking to him in one place, as he's always so busy. So I hope you enjoy the chat and you find it informative and useful about what it is that he does for David Austin Roses and what his day-to-day working life looks like. Well, I'm here today with Liam, who is the Senior Rose Consultant at David Austin Roses. Now, Liam, I know you quite well. I've known you from all sorts of different shows. I've bumped into you here, there and everywhere, including here at David Austin Roses about 4 or 5 years ago.
Yep.
Tell those of the people that are listening at home what you do and your journey so far with David Austin Roses.
Yeah, so that's quite an interesting one. So as you said, I'm Senior Rose Consultant and I'm the head of the Professional Trade Department. So we look after garden designers and landscapers and public-facing spaces. So day to day, that'll be dealing with those people, placing orders, helping with their projects. We also do garden design, both public and private gardens. And then the large bulk of my year at the moment is spent travelling. So this year we visited 134 rose gardens, 124 individually over the whole of the year. And we travel around and give advice on those gardens, on planting, updating, redesign, that kind of thing. And then also do things like the bare root workshops and the pruning workshops.
Yeah, and obviously those running here at David Austin Roses, bare root courses running from the 1st to the 17th of November.
Yeah.
I've obviously attended one of those with yourself today and watched you do your presentation, and then you're planting your rose out in the garden, and then luckily get to take home a bare root rose of my choice at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Then you've got your pruning courses starting when?
In January. So the pruning courses will run through January and February.
Okay, fantastic. And obviously at the moment, if you wanted to, people can head online and they can order bare root roses for delivery from the beginning of November.
Yep.
And they can also get 15% off, can't they?
That's correct.
Yeah, by using code BareRoot24.
That's
for EU and UK customers. So you've talked a little bit about your day. How did you first become interested in gardening?
I don't have that story where people say they've done it since they were 6 and we was in grandma's garden and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a bit of a porcupine because you talk about your grandma and her garden an awful lot.
My grandma lives with me. She's, I'm really close to her, and she's always been interested in gardening. And when she had her own house, had a lovely greenhouse. And actually, we did find a picture of me not so long back with a terrible bucket hat and some lovely roses in her garden. But in the main, I went to uni to study languages, French, German and Spanish, and that's how I got this job. And it was through her in the respect that I was looking for a job, and a job in the customer service department at the beginning came up at David Austin. And my grandma said to me, I think you should apply for this job. And I said, no, absolutely not. I don't know anything about gardening or roses or anything. And then she came around the next day and said, I really think you need to go and apply for this job. And then I did, and I got it. And then it sort of worked from there. And David Austin's quite a unique place. I always sort of refer to it as like Disneyland for rose growers. If you want to grow roses, you become interested in plants, this is the place.
Well, I describe it as the mothership.
Exactly. And I think when you are surrounded by people who are really interested and passionate, have done something for a long time, you pick it up by osmosis anyway. But I worked in the customer service department, and then my colleague Richard Stubbs, with whom I work now, my other colleague Joe, we work in the trade department together. But Richard's been here for 30 odd years. He was head gardener, and I developed a really good friendship with him, and he's super passionate, but he also really wants to share. So I was really fortunate, and I would just ask him, why this, why do you do it like that, why do you grow this plant here, why not that rose?
I've got a little vision of you sort of following around and tugging on the back, but why?
That's the one.
Like a 4-year-old.
And I think that's the way you learn, isn't it? And that's the sort of way, when we do the bare root workshops or the pruning workshops, I try to explain things. I always think, if we're going to say something, if we're going to say we prune in January and February, let's explain why, so that people can then understand. Because if you understand something, you then do it more easily. But if you've got this niggle in the back of your head, well, some other people do it at this time and some do it at that time. You don't pick it up as readily. So that happened, and then it just went on from there, really. And the company's really good at pushing people who are passionate, and worked my way up to now being head of department. And there's 3 of us, and we're currently hiring for a new member of staff, so there'll be 4, because it's just expanding really rapidly. So that's great. Fantastic.
It's really interesting to hear you say that that you weren't particularly interested in gardening, and languages was your step into it. I'm assuming the language thing helps with a lot of the pronunciations and the translation of things, because obviously a lot of things are done in Latin, and it's quite heavy.
It does, yeah. I mean, I studied French, German and Spanish just because I was interested.
You're making me look really bad now, because I did GCSE French, and I got a GCSE level D, which is not very good. Probably my lowest. It was my lowest GCSE grade, and all the way through my GCSE oral exam, all you can hear in the background is my French teacher, Mrs. Webb, writing on a wiping board, squeak, or you could squeak, squeak, dot, dot, wiggle, wiggle, as she was obviously trying to instruct but not say. I really, really regret not. And I did Latin as a GCSE as well, so I've got a decent footing with the Latin, but I really wish I'd paid more attention.
It definitely helps. And when I sort of first started out here, I studied a bit with the RHS, the level 2 and 3, and they started talking about the Latin, and having that understanding of the species and the genus and what that word means, and if it's maritima, then it'd probably be good near the sea, is really important. It's something you probably take for granted now day to day. You can obviously garden pretty much without it, but it is quite important. So it did help, and I do have opportunities to use it. This year I've been over to Germany with my colleagues in the licensing department and gave a few tours in German over there. But it's a bit like riding a bike if you don't keep doing it. And my passion now is roses, so the fact I can speak French comes out once a year when I go to France for no other reason, really.
You can order yourself a nice meal and a beer.
Or I can understand what people are saying about me when I'm on the metro, but other than that, it's
It's also interesting to hear you say about during the bare root courses and the pruning courses about trying to back up about why you do certain things and why. It's something that through my media I've really tried to install, and it's very difficult to do that doesn't make it sound heavy, overbearing, hard work, sometimes preachy, because there is a lot of science behind what people like us do. Obviously I have a degree in horticulture, and I understand the science of it very well, and trying to install that into people and say, well, we actually do this for a reason, because, and it's not until you give them the because that all of a sudden they get this sort of green light and this sort of moment of awakening. It's like, oh, actually someone else was just telling me I needed to do, and it sounded like an instruction or someone waggling their finger and saying you must do, and then actually there is a reason behind it, and if you do it for a reason, you get a better result.
I think that's it, and I think you always have to remember that at the end of the day we just give the advice of what we do, and I would always try and explain the other schools of thought if we can. A good example is something like spraying. People don't generally as a society want to spray now. They want to be beneficial to insects and other pollinators in the garden. It's laborious, it costs money, and all those kinds of things.
Well, we're also the trustees of the most of the land in the entire world, not just here in the UK. Our front and back gardens make up a vast proportion of the total land, and we are in control of it.
I think we're getting that more and more now, aren't we? So if you take that as an example, we don't spray pesticides here on the nursery at all, but it's not for me to necessarily say don't do X, don't do Y. I can just provide the options, and it's up to each individual gardener to make that choice. And most people are making that choice of not wanting to do it and building, a good ecosystem in their own garden. But it's not up to us to say do X, do Y, just to present the options on the table. And we talk from the experience of the company, which the first rose was 1961, so there's plenty of experience behind the facts.
Again, from my point of view, the fit becoming a brand ambassador for you guys has just worked like an absolute dream. It's I haven't had to worry about the environmental impact of the packaging, the compost, the shipping. All you guys have done all of that for me, including even things on the nursery and your production side of water harvesting and electricity harvesting and all that kind of thing. So I've been in the blessed position where I haven't. A lot of people in my position, they align themselves with a brand, and then at some point they kind of fall on the sword or get caught up on something that doesn't look particularly tidy. But for me, it's just an absolute dream. I know behind the scenes that everything is exactly as it should be. The company's forward thinking and looking into these things well before they become an issue.
I think they've always been like that, and it's only when people like yourself remind us of that, because we're doing it every day. You don't really think about it, but we gave a tour to some garden designers a couple of months back, and I started just digging into a little bit more about the rainwater harvesting and the packaging. And yes, it's cardboard or paper, and yes, it's potato starch, and we know that can be recycled. But it's never something that the company sort of shouted about. Yes, it's but
I think you should.
But they just do it because that's what they want to do, and that's their contribution. If you look now, all of our potted roses that get sent out are in peat-free compost. Whether people know that, I'm not sure. But all of those container roses that are sent out are in peat-free compost. Actually, that's a big deal.
It is a big move,
actually, a lot of nurseries are still working towards it, and it's been hard work.
There are problems, obviously, with going peat-free. Is that we're used to a growing media that naturally holds an awful lot of water, and the fully organic soil conditioning composts that are available now don't hold that water. So for a rose, it's causing you some growing problems as far as disease.
Certainly when they started, they've got now a mix that works pretty well on a commercial scale for potting. But as I'm sure you're aware, when you plant those roses in the containers, as we said, that they're really dependent on you. So you have to be really careful with what that growing medium is. But there is definitely ways of doing it. As you said, we're used to the recipe of John Innes number 3 coming pretty standard across all bags that you purchase it from in the plant centres across the UK. But we just need to do a little bit of tampering with a compost to make a perfect growing mix. But it's definitely possible to do it, and at the end of the day, it's better for the environment. So,
well, I think it's something you guys should shout about an awful lot more. I had some stock delivered. I'm not going to say by whom. Stock delivered to home, and I was very, very shocked by the amount of plastic and the amount of packaging, and certainly the amount that wasn't recyclable.
Yeah,
I'm very much aware of that at home, and I don't use flexi tie. I don't use cable ties.
Yes.
I'm really funny about it. But I think it's something you guys should really, really shout about a lot more.
I think so, and the pots too are another good example, because obviously they can be recycled at curbside now. But the David Austin rose pots, I see them being used for all sorts. People growing carrots in them and growing other plants in them, because they're just that sort of long shape with give you enough space for a long root to develop. So. David Austin rose pots are the types of pots that you see in everybody's garden for a long period of time anyway.
Well, you can imagine I might have a few kicking about at home that I continue
You're hoarding the David Austin pots, that's fine.
Now, you mentioned earlier, you're on the road a huge amount.
Yes.
I'm just aware of where you're going social media-wise when you're saying, I'm at this garden, I'm talking consulting here, but there's also your show schedule. So how on earth are you juggling your travelling schedule with your garden at home? Because I also know you have an allotment.
With struggle really. I took the allotment on probably a year ago now, and just at the time when we started travelling a lot, and thought this is a terrible idea, but I really wanted to do it, and I really wanted to prove that you could grow ornamental plants, flowers, cut flowers with vegetables, not necessarily in a lovely looking way, but that it was possible to do it.
I think it's a lovely looking way. I do it a lot at home. I plant all sorts of things in my borders, from cabbages to lettuces. If I've got a hole and I've got some cabbages and lettuce that need bedding out, I'll wedge them in there.
I think you do it in your garden because you know it will work, and because that suits your taste. When you do it on an allotment where people are used to onions growing in rows and that kind of thing, the looks you get can be quite astonishing. But I didn't get that really on my allotment. Everybody's been super nice about it. But I guess with great struggle, really, as I said, my grandma lives with me, so she looks after a lot of the garden, and I couldn't do that without her, to be honest. And also...
Now, I believe she's quite a large fan of mine, isn't she?
Yeah,
she listens to a lot of...
She absolutely loves seeing your videos on Instagram, actually, to be fair. She says you're very jolly, and she loves hearing about the roses. She probably hears more about the roses from you than she does me, because I don't talk about them that much now. But I guess in the garden setting at home, I probably get an hour or two a week at the allotment, and there's quite a few roses there. Got a big tottering by gently hedge, which looks amazing. But in the garden at home, it's just about now. When I started, I wanted to collect all the roses. I wanted to see all the growth habits and see the differences in all of them. But now, the more and more I'm travelling on the road, the more and more I've realised that I need to reduce the varieties in my garden. And I know you do the same, where actually if it's not performing well, then it is taking up space. And there are varieties that will perform better. And I'm also interested in not just David Austin roses, but other breeders and how those roses do as well. So bringing other cultivars in to see how they perform, because at the end of the day, if it's got a high disease pressure, it's causing us a problem. We don't spray, we don't use pesticides or fungicides in the garden. So when you're in a small space as well, it's got to work for its money. So I think it's about that. It's about, if you've got minimal time, there's still work to do.
Yeah.
Roses, often people say, I want something with low maintenance. To be honest, roses aren't low maintenance. I'd love to say they are, but they're not, because you'll do a bit of feeding, a bit of watering, mulching, deadheading, but it's all easy and it's all fun to do.
Yeah.
But if you choose the right variety, your job becomes 10 times easier.
Yes.
Whereas when people don't consider that and they don't know any different, they're thinking it's hard work, when actually, if you swapped out Zephyrin Druin for Gertrude Jekyll, you wouldn't have something that had black spot rust and powdery mildew.
It's funny, you were talking about this on today's course, weren't you? That actually if it's no longer bringing you joy, or for instance, I talk to my followers about things called gateway plants.
Yes.
They might be amazing varieties, they might have a huge amount of weight behind them, and everybody might think they're incredibly popular. But if you have that one rose in your garden that just instantly goes down with the black spot, the mould and the mildew very early in the season, and that's the stepping point of bringing it into the garden, which then causes you a multitude of problems across the entire garden for the whole season. Actually, it's better to just remove that rose and replace it with something else that does bring you joy, and stop battling with it. And
I think that's one thing that I probably noticed the most from your content, and we touched a little bit on today, but I think what I notice most about your content is you're obviously extremely observant of your own plants in the garden. So you
probably
see
a little
how
bit too much.
Probably a little bit too much, but they become like characters.
Are you telling me I need to get out a little bit more?
No, you don't. No, it's not that. It's just about the fact that, particularly when it comes to pruning, for example, you know kind of how you pruned it last year and how it reacted this year, and whether it was a little bit too big or a little bit too small, and how you need to react. Everybody's got their phone in their pocket all the time now. If you're not sure how to prune it how you think, take a picture of it. When you come to prune it next year, you'll obviously have taken pictures in the summer to share with your friends, but look back and think, okay, well, I did it like that. Actually, it was a bit too big, so I need to prune it a bit harder. We're lucky here because we're with the plants all the time, and I see them from the top of Scotland right down to the bottom of Cornwall in lots of different conditions, so I'm used to them working in different ways. And for some of your listeners in America, something that you plant here in the UK, good example is Graham Thomas when it was released in 83. When they sent it over to America and they were planting it in California, it shot up to 15, 20 foot in the air. And they were saying, well, you said it's a shrub. And that's how we realised things started to climb. Yeah. You put that in a cold climate like Sweden, it pretty much will stay.
Stays 3-4 feet, yeah.
So when you become observant, and that's why things change, and that's why roses get discontinued, because at the end of the day, things evolve, the weather's evolving, we evolve as gardeners. There's some roses that I've looked at 4 or 5 years down the line and thought, why did I ever plant that? It's horrible. David Austin or otherwise, colour doesn't work in my space, or as you say, it just doesn't bring you the joy that you thought it did anymore. And we evolve with that, and that is gardening.
I'm always trying to tell people that it's your garden, you're the gardener, you're the orchestrator of what you're looking at, and not to be afraid of giving it a go. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are ways these things are done or should be done. But if it doesn't work for you, give it a go. And if it doesn't work this year, give it a go another way.
Well, it's completely personal, isn't it, in that respect? Garden designers will often say to me, well, I've got this pink rose, what rose would you put next to it? Might give some options.
Again, I get asked that a lot. So what would you choose? It's like, this is your personal taste.
Exactly.
What do you like? What I like necessarily doesn't look...
Pink and yellow is a good example. Some people say, I want to put pink and yellow together. What do you think? I don't do that in my garden unless it's a sort of warm pink.
See, I do.
Unless it's a warm pink. But some people like that. At the end of the day, what I would say is if someone comes into your garden and says, I wouldn't put that next to each other. Well,
don't look at it then.
Don't look at it, or don't invite them back. It's your garden, isn't it, at the end of the day? So,
The other one I get asked, obviously, we open my garden to the public a couple of times, and people say, how do you come up with your style? How do you do this? And it's like, I'm not entirely sure how to answer that question. I just do. It comes very naturally. I buy the plants that I like. I plant them in any order that I want. I suppose I'm very great Dixter in that respect. I don't really pay a huge amount of attention to the size and the height and the width of stuff. It all gets piled in, and the fronts of my borders can be high, the backs can be low, and it kind of undulates and moves. Yeah. But I'm lucky enough to have the space to do that.
You can do that in a small space too, and I think that stems back to, as you've just rightly said there, what you like. I always say this to my partner Dan about his house. I always think everything in his house is lovely. And I always say, well, how did you know that would go with that? It's not actually about thinking about what would go with what. It's
does he love every piece?
Yeah, do you love every piece? It was William Morris, I think, who said that actually, if you look that quote up. Either everything's got to be useful or you've got to love it.
Or it's got to be beautiful.
If you love it, and you love everything in there, then it will automatically work together, and that's exactly the same.
We get an awful lot of that about our house.
Yeah.
We were lucky enough that our last house was actually placed into Period Living magazine.
Oh, really? Wow.
And they couldn't work out where to place us, because obviously these things are normally placed with advertisements but of course nothing that we've collected really comes from anywhere. It's all charity shops, surfed, it's salvaged from places. So we've created this wonderful look, but none of it has any value to it, and it doesn't really have any commercial sort of angle. So they didn't know what to do with it for some time. It took a while to publish it, but again, people look at our house now. So how did you do it? And actually, the way is, Mark and I love absolutely every item in our home, and we just chuck it together and just keep piling it on.
And that's the same in the garden setting, isn't it? It's exactly the same in the garden setting, I would say.
Now, this morning we were talking about mycorrhizal fungi and adding that to the plants as you plant bare root roses.
Yes.
Is there a common misconception about roses that you would like to clear up? Is there something that you get asked an awful lot at, for instance, Hampton Court, at Chelsea trade shows? Something that comes up again and again. What are the common misconceptions? Can you sort of shoot down now and say, right, that's not the case?
Yeah, a couple. Roses don't grow in shade and don't grow on a north-facing wall. That's a big thing. You hear that people say that you can't grow roses on a north-facing wall or in shade. Yeah. Not in full shade, no, not under the canopy of a large oak. They will struggle. And roses are generally sun lovers. But certainly there are a number of varieties that if you're getting that minimum of about 4 hours sunlight per day during the growing season will work. Generous Gardener, Mary Delaney, Claire Austin are three good examples. Donahue in shrubs, or Kew Gardens is a good one, certainly for shade, Princess Anne. So that's definitely one. From a pruning point of view, my bugbear is this idea of cutting at an angle to an outward-facing bud. Not to the fact that actually it probably is horticulturally right, but to the fact that doing those things when you have a lot of roses in your garden doesn't actually make any difference to the rose growing healthily and successfully, or how much it flowers. Yeah. If you've got all your stems growing on one side and you're trying to direct the growth onto the other side, then by all means cut above that bud facing that way to try and direct it. But actually, if you've got a good rounded plant, when you cut above an outward-facing bud, there's still going to be an inward-facing bud that shoots. It was more important with your hybrid teas when you were growing them in the 60s, 70s and 80s, and you wanted the buds outward-facing so that your flowers were held singly, so that they were good quality and there was no competition. You could cut them for the vase. That's really important. And then
but the most important thing is they get pruned.
They get pruned and that they're shaped. And then the other thing, of course, is the angle. There must be 1/4 of an inch above a bud on the first day in January under the full moon.
I think the American audience is very much more bogged down with that. And I get an awful lot of comments, especially on the YouTube channel, about the very, very finite technical bits. And I think that's one of the issues with social media as a whole. That not everybody... Well, I have to be careful what I say here now without sounding too bad, but there are certain online people that will get hold of a very small piece of information and decide that is given gospel and it's concrete and it must be followed and you shouldn't deviate from the plan. No. But again, you're saying that actually as long as they get pruned, that...
those things make no difference. If you cut at an angle, they say that it'll stop the water sitting on the stem and freezing over and causing damage. I've never seen that. I've seen thousands and thousands of roses and I've never seen it, and it wouldn't affect the growth of the plant. But these tiny little things are all the things that make people think, gosh, roses are hard work.
Yeah,
but they don't
add to that weight
need to be. The problem is with rose growing is that there has been a lot of information around it. You know, we're adding to it now, but there's been a lot of information around rose growing over the years. A lot of it in sort of 40, 50 years ago was concerned with people growing roses for the show bench.
Yes.
We are growing garden plants. This should be a garden shrub in a border. It should play a part. Forget the word prune, think about the word shape and how it fits in the landscape. But those are two of the things that I get asked quite a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine you get quite bored of answering those questions.
I think it's always good fun, and if people are super enthused about roses, to see the light bulb go off in their head, or to see that you've considered their own garden space and something that works, and you must get this too when someone plants something and it works really well, and you suggested it, and that's
I just
really
try and make
feeling.
it as accessible as possible.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. That's what we want to do, and all the information that we give about rose growing is to try and make it as simple and as easy as possible to get the best success, to keep people engaged with roses.
Yeah, and I think that's why I say to people, actually, if you go out into your garden as often as you can, please. I mean, there's so many people that will pack up their barbecue, pack up their sun lounger at the end of August. That's bank holidays over. They won't go back out into their garden until Easter. It's like, well, actually, if you tootled off to the garden centre or had a look online and bought things, and I say to people to create a garden for all year round interest, if you just buy 2 or 3 plants every 2 or 3 months, you will end up quite naturally with a fabric of a garden that actually carries you all the way through the year. You'll be interested and want to go out into your garden, even in the depths of the winter. There are things out there to do and there are things out there to enjoy, and that's where the real passion comes from.
I think it does, and that's a really good tip actually, isn't it? Because if you continue, you probably stop going to the garden centre in the winter, but if you continue to go into your local garden centre,
they're putting things in front of you
that looks good.
Yeah.
It has to look good at that time of year, so
takes all of the guesswork out of it. They're selling what looks nice or what's particularly interesting.
If that appeals to you, as long as it doesn't get too big, you've not picked a sort of 40-foot
Well, it's like ordering a takeaway. You've got to do it little and often. You can't order too much at once. Otherwise, like if you buy everything for your garden in Easter, well, your garden will look fabulous in March and April, but by June it will look really tired.
No, exactly. And that's the thing with roses, isn't it? You've got 2 flushes to work with. So in terms of companion planting, you've got the opportunity to plant...
Well, unless you're talking about Penelope, Lively and Donahue. I mean, 3 or 4, 5, sometimes 5 flushes I've counted on Penelope and Donahue.
They're more continual, aren't they, I would say? And same with Kew Gardens and Olivia. But you've got lots of opportunities to pair different plants with them to flower.
I mean, Donahue in the show gardens here is... I mean, I just did a live event here and it's looking like it's May.
Yeah.
It's smothered in buds.
Yeah, and as long as we get sort of good mild weather, that will be fine. The thing is, at this time of year, you don't get the best quality flowers, but to be honest, when it's dreary, wet and cold, and it's gone dark now in the winter,
anything is nice.
Anything that's colourful has got a bit of fragrance is lovely on the breakfast table.
Now, is there any... This is always a really difficult one to ask somebody who likes a particular subject, but is there any particular roses you can recommend? Now, you've mentioned at your allotment, you've got your hedge of Tottering by Gently. That's quite a lot of plants, about 12 or so, isn't it, in a row, isn't it?
There's about 17 on one side and about 5 on the other.
Also quite a lot.
And I use Tottering by Gently for lots of reasons. One, because it's really pollinator friendly, because it's obviously open flower. I find it makes a good, strong plant very quickly. Very healthy, obviously.
And once again, still in flower again here in the garden.
That's one of those ones. Most roses flower in flushes, don't they? So something like Gertrude Jekyll is pretty standard. It will flower first flush, have a rest, and have a smattering of blooms for the second flush. It's not got an amazing second flush comparatively to some, because it's an older variety. But Tottering by Gently, Kew, Olivia, these are ones that just continually produce flowers pretty much all the way through the summer. Not as in 2 massive flushes, but more continual. And I think you have to mix those types of blooms throughout the borders. So definitely Tottering by Gently. I think one really undervalued and underused rose is Nye Bevan. I think Nye Bevan, we released that in 21 for the NHS, and it came in this lovely limited edition blue pot. Really great rose. And I think it's probably fallen under the radar for a couple of reasons. One, possibly because it's yellow. There's some, I don't know what it is, this witchcraft people not wanting yellow. I don't know if people are
Well, it's
all
got a
yellowed
wonderful
out.
iridescent sheen to it. I say this a lot. It has the ability, much like Buttercup
Yes.
and Woollerton Old Hall and the now retired Jude the Obscure, that has that lovely sheen to it. It emits colour, which I really, really like.
Because it's quite a pale colour, isn't it? But it's quite bright.
It's got a little brassy edge to it.
I think people are sort of maybe all yellowed out by the time the daffodils have come and gone. But the thing I like about Nye Bevan, and the other reason why I think, it's missed, is perhaps because the flower is not... It's not overly showy. It's not the big star of the show. And I think we have to get away from this idea of wanting every rose to do everything in every part of the garden. I certainly know that David is extremely keen on all roses having a really good fragrance. Everybody wants a rose with fragrance, of course they do.
See, Nye Bevan's got obviously a quite warm and spicy fragrance.
But it's fairly light comparatively. Now, one you'd miss, for example, is the Lark Ascending. If you discontinued that out of the collection because it didn't have a lark...
No, don't
you
do
wouldn't.
that. I couldn't do it.
I'd protest, but if you didn't have that in it because of the fragrance, you'd be missing out on a very good rose.
Oh, it's fabulous.
If you've got
utterly
a
beautiful.
3-metre long border, you don't need an overpoweringly strong fragrance at the back because you're not going to get there.
No.
So Nye Bevan is quite cupped, isn't it? And it's got these lovely sort of heart-shaped petals around the outside when you take them off. And it's sort of got that halo of a lighter colour around the outside. Quite a light fragrance. A bit myrrhish, I guess. Quite upright, quite compact. But the good thing about it is that it just continually produces blooms over the whole of the season. I was just going to say,
if I may offer my personal opinion, one of the ones I get an awful lot about Nye Bevan is it shatters quickly.
Yes.
People are utterly obsessed with how long a flower lasts on a plant. And the standard response is, for myself, is there is no way that this can be calculated. If the flower opens at 6 a.m. in the morning and a pollinator arrives at it at 6:01 and pollinates the flower, as far as the flower is concerned, it's done. It will shed its petals. But with Nye Bevan, they might not last a long time, but boy, oh boy, does it throw out some flower. I mean, literally, they just keep coming again and again. And sprays are containing like 30 buds at once. You know, that could be in flower for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, just on one spray. And you think, well, actually, fine, the bloom itself may shatter quickly, but there are plenty of them and they keep on coming.
I think that's that observationist in you that's observed that, because that's so true.
It's outside my kitchen window while I do the washing up. It's just there.
It's the same with something like Claire Austin. People say to me that shatters quite quickly, and William and Catherine. Now, when the plants are young, you observe that a lot more because they don't produce as many blooms as they would when they're 3-4 years old. And certainly you'll observe it more if you plant singly. When they're planted in groups here, because everything's group planted here in 5s, 7s, 9s, etc., and even numbers too. You know, you can plant in even numbers. That's another misconception. If you've got space for 2, put 2 in. You know,
2 is better than 1.
You won't notice when they're grown together. But I think as the plant ages and it produces more flowers, you notice it less. And again, in a mixed border setting, it doesn't matter if the flowers shatter particularly quickly because they're producing more. There's always, when I take people around the garden, they always point out Nye Bevan. When one is in flower, there is always one in colour bud, and there's always one in green bud behind it. It's a bit like a play. You can't have everybody as the main character because it becomes messy. You need these supporting roles in the background that add something, and that's a perfect example in a border setting. And it's also really healthy, and if it's not healthy, then it can't show any of the other characters.
It's interesting you should bring it up as well, because I get an awful lot of, obviously occupying a lot of my time on social media and actually now making a living out of it. I get a huge amount of these throwaway disposable comments. I bought this and I'm disappointed. Or I bought this and it doesn't do what I expected it to do. So, okay, explain a little bit about how old the plant is, where you've planted it, your feeding, watering, mulching regime. Turns out the plant's 6 weeks in the ground. And you think, this is a long-term investment. It took 13 years to breed. It took 3 years to get to the point where it was dug up and sent to you as either a potted or bare root plant. You've planted it. You can't expect to just sort of switch it on and then it look amazing. Well, the pictures you post, and this is what I'm talking in a voice, but the pictures you post are, how do you get your flowers so big? It's, well, I've trialled it for a year at home. I know you guys have done rigorous testing.
Yes.
I'm not saying that my testing's any better than yours, but I won't allow my opinion to be put on the line unless I've had a plant for a year. I've observed it through 4 seasons, so I know what I'm talking about. But they say, well, it doesn't do the X, Y, and Z. You think, just give it some time. This is going to take at least 3, 4, 5 seasons to get itself settled. It's been pulled out the ground, plunked in the ground again. You haven't watered it properly. It's had a blazing hot summer. Just give it some time, especially when it comes to things like climbing roses, where you're trying to get something 8, 9, 10 feet tall. These are large plants. They don't just arrive overnight. No. They take a lot of time to get themselves established.
You're so right, and I think we try really hard to show something that looks beautiful, don't we? At the end of the day, the marketing material, the catalogues that's sent out, I mean, these are books in their own right. Yes, it's a catalogue, but I know people...
Well, the book's here. I mean, look at it.
They have them on their coffee table. People refer to them. It's something lovely to read about the fragrance and the history and all those things, but we are showing a mature plant at the end of the day. And the shrub roses will take about 3 seasons. Look at the US, for example. It's changing now, but a lot of our photography is taken in the UK because our HQ is in the UK. So sometimes the flowers, the colours will be slightly different.
More rich and deep in colour because we don't have the heat.
And I know you've mentioned it before because I've listened to you online, and I totally agree. Certainly the second flush, the colours in the second flush often are almost a little bit better because the light and the heat isn't so intense and it allows that sort of intensity of colour to come through. One of the big charming things about the David Austin roses for me is that they don't stay the same. A traditional old hybrid tea would start bright red with a high pointed centre, open up to a very simple flower. In the middle it would be red, it would finish red. The flower shape wouldn't change a huge amount apart from when it's blown over. The nice thing about the David Austin roses, take you Stacey Vi, starts with a pinkish red bud. As it opens up, you get that really warm corally pink, don't you? And it starts reflecting into sort of a domed, flat dome rosette-shaped flower. And you've got that warm pink, so you can put that with warm colours in the garden. But then as that ages, it ages out to a more sort of soft alba pink, I guess. Yeah. And that change that you observe in the garden is so important with the David Austin
Which is why
roses.
when I review a product, I always make sure that I've got as many. I quite often hold them back, so I've got bud, I've got full flower, I've got almost fully blown and collapsing, and sometimes if I can, hips and a little bit of foliage, because I think they're beautiful in all of their stages. And something you spoke about this morning on the Bare Root Rose course about the production of what people would be deemed to be suckering growth. Yes. They panic and go, oh my goodness, my rose is producing burgundy, red, scarlet, bronze, sometimes apricot-y yellow, and they think, oh my God, there's something wrong with it. There's something wrong with it at all. It's that's really nice.
We want that, and I guess it's only really in the US where it comes into play, because obviously they have rose rosette disease over there, which we fortunately don't have, so sometimes they can.
No, but again, 99% of the cases that get sent to me, they're just panicking.
It's just new growth, and it's great.
I've never seen it myself. No. I do a lot of diagnosis online, but
it's not great to panic, but it's great that people are interested and want to sort of talk about it, and it's great that there's people like yourself that want to share that information and experience with people, because
digging up and burning things all the time when it's not necessary.
And I think the good thing about what you're doing here is you're giving your own opinion, your own experience. I think you shouldn't shy away from opinion. Graham Thomas was probably arguably one of the greatest rosarians that the country has ever had. All of his books, which I refer to pretty much daily, they're all his opinion, and that is what I value. Yeah. And when you get to a certain level of interest, what you want is lots of people's opinions. You get them all together and say, that's great, now I'm forming my opinion based on this and experience. You can't shy away from opinion, and there'll be lots of opinions. You might ask me one question here and ask another colleague who's been here 30 years, and they might say something slightly different, and that's great. That encourages healthy debate, and it encourages progression, which is what we want, really.
Brazen. Right, so going back to your show schedule,
yes.
Obviously you attend things like Hampton Court, Chelsea, Malvern Hills.
No, so I've been to Malvern Show. We don't attend at Malvern Show because it's quite a difficult show to get things into flower for, and of course at that point we're already busy forcing the roses along for Chelsea, because obviously there's a bit of forcing there to get them ready.
So out of them all, which is your favourite show to attend?
Gosh, I mean, I think Chelsea is great. I think it's really exciting, it's a buzz. Chelsea for me is the flagpole in the start of the season. Mm-hmm. I know when I've started at Chelsea, no one's going to see me for the rest of the summer really. I'm going to be out doing lots of things. However, I do like Hampton Court because I like the sort of more...
It's a personal favourite of mine. It's much more relaxed.
And it's a really lovely setting, as is Chelsea, but it's a really lovely setting, and it seems a little less intense, and all the rose growers are together, and the fragrance in there is wonderful, and we all go around each other's stand on the rose growers and chat with each other about new varieties. You know, there's no sort of like competition between us. Everybody wants everybody to do well because we're all interested in the rose. So I think Hampton for me is great, but all of the shows are great because we get people from all across the site, from production, from breeding, from licensing, from retail, from trade. Everybody's working together at all various levels. So even new people who've come in will come to a show. People who've been here 30 years will come to a show. We all get paired up with each other and we're all learning from each other. And gosh, the questions you get at Chelsea, you can't believe the amount of questions and the variety of questions. And I got asked one year to write, well, can you write the top 20 questions you think you get asked? Well, that could go on for such a long time with the amount of questions that you could answer, actually, that you need to be prepared for, that there's just no way you could do it. And that's the exciting thing,
No,
isn't it?
I did actually overhear you speaking to a lady at Chelsea, probably a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, who we were talking about, and you introduced me to this particular lady, and she mentioned, I would never buy that rose because I don't like the name. And you just think, I can never imagine not buying a rose because I love it, but I wouldn't buy it because it didn't have the name I particularly appreciated. It's just
it is a strange one, and also the opposite.
I think it was Wisley 2008.
Yeah, and it's a shame because it's a really good rose, actually.
It's a bomb-proof rose that will survive virtually anywhere.
Yeah, and I think it's also the opposite, isn't it? You'll get people who will only buy a rose if it's got the name John in it or something like that, when actually you're much better off trying to get a good rose than the name. And the names here all carry that sort of sense of Englishness connected to literary characters or culture or history, and we've never shied away from that. You know, it is the English rose at the end of the day. But I think that helps bring out the character of the plant.
Yeah.
You know, there is always a story and a reason why the names are named that they are.
Such as obviously the collaboration this year with Emma Bridgewater.
Yeah, and that was really important.
Two epitomal English brands coming together with one project.
Completely.
Obviously your rose, but
completely
immortalised in porcelain as well at the same time.
I think we have sort of similar client bases, I guess. And actually, I did a talk at Emma Bridgewater this year, and I was amazed at how many people were avid rose growers and avid collectors of pottery.
Yes, yeah.
It's one of the first times I've sort of been to Emma Bridgewater, and again,
if they collect pottery, they collect.
Gosh,
pottery.
I had not realised. I had not realised that two things. One, how passionate people were about it. You know, they go to collectors' days and they're there queuing up really early.
Whole
in the
Welsh
morning.
dresses full of them.
Yeah, and also I hadn't realised, a bit like with roses, that they encourage people not to have matching sets.
No.
Like, you know, get different things, get them all, mix and match them, just like you would have seen on your grandma's dresser 50, 60 years ago.
Or in my house right now.
Oh, your house. But I think that stems right back to that point of, if you love something, it will work.
Yes, yeah.
Because you love it, and people can see you love it, you know. And so that was really exciting. And when they put the rose onto the mug, the half-pint mug, the Emma Bridgewater, it was immediately visible why.
I mean, that reveal worked. I did as a live with that particular... I didn't even... Luckily, I didn't shake the box and throw it on the floor, but I didn't know the mug was actually at the bottom of it.
Okay.
And it wasn't until I pulled it out. There's several shots of me bringing the mug out alongside the rose, and the representation on the mug to the flower is the capture is really good.
It's extremely detailed, and it shows that sort of eclectic, antique
colour. Fading, that silver grey, platinum grey that it gets to.
The rose on the porcelain. Yeah. And for some reason, I don't know what the magic is behind it, but the cups of tea that you get out of those mugs just taste a little bit better.
Oh, see, they're not large enough for me. I like my tea by the sort of
well,
by the 1.5 gallon if possible.
But it just tastes that little bit better. It fits nice in the hand. It was just a perfect collaboration. I really loved us doing that.
Wonderful. Good. Standard question that I'm asking every guest on the pod show.
Yeah.
If you had to leave your garden in a hurry... Now, my husband Marcus maybe reword this question because he said it was a little bit too finite, that your house was on fire and you never got to return. But if you had to take one plant, any plant, away from your garden, which would it be?
I'd take Dame Judi Dench with me.
Okay, which is very lucky then.
Yeah, I'd take Dame Judi Dench away with me. Do you know, often people sort of...
Is she house trained?
I think people often say to me, well, why do you choose that rose? There's so many roses around. It's not particularly fragrant. The repeat flowering is fairly good. It produces okay hips. It's a bit arching in its growth. You know, why that rose? I think for two reasons. One, it's been with me a long time, so I'm, you know,
so it's one of the first ones you got.
Princess Anne was the first one I ever grew, and I've still got the original rose. I didn't know I was going to become obsessed with roses at that point, but for some reason, when I cut the first dead head off, I thought, I'll just keep that, and I've got it at home still, the original flower.
Yeah.
That first one that I grew. But Dame Judi Dench, for me, shows exactly what I'm looking for in a rose, which is a change.
Yeah.
Which is that it starts quite high pointed in the centre, like a hybrid tea type flower.
It's very unusual in its makeup. The petals are very long,
yes.
aren't they? Almost like a chrysanthemum petal, yeah. Spoon-like in their makeup.
It's that. It starts with that. It then opens up to quite a flat rosette-shaped flower.
Yeah.
And then, once that's finished, you get that sort of traditional, what I would call a halo. You get that with quite a lot of the David Austin's. That's cheap as the same.
Bleaching around the outside.
It's bleached, that's it. And then, as that ages, it then ends up this sort of ruffled, pompony type blousy flower. And certainly later in the season, you get bits of pink in it as well.
Yeah.
And it's got quite an arching habit. So I'd never... When we do design, I would never put that in a formal parterre outside a house, for example, but it's really good in a mixed border. And I've got it sort of on a 4-foot obelisk, and I've wrapped that around, and I grow sweet peas through it.
Yeah.
So that would be the rose that I take.
Well, I've got mine sort of lolloping up a foxglove tree.
That's the one. Yeah.
And but actually for 2024, I think makes up my largest liked or ranked picture for the entire year. I managed to capture it beautifully. I've got some wolfsbane in the background, and it was sort of poking its way up and sort of hanging its way out of the sort of knee of this tree, and it just absolutely beautiful. But I've got it on a site that I work at, and much like you mentioned about your nan pruning things really low, one of the ladies that does the pruning on that particular site likes to prune things really low, and theirs didn't come into flower, but theirs is a lovely sort of rounded shaped bush, and that's kept quite small. So it does go to prove that if you adjust your pruning techniques ever so slightly, you can train them to do exactly what you want them to do.
I think that's it, isn't it? It's quite an iridescent colour as well. I think the tea fragrance is quite good as well. Not a huge amount of thorns. I remember when they chose to name the rose for Dame Judi Dench, they said that she'd seen the rose, and she sort of chose that because it had quite a relaxed habit, and that fit her character.
Well, I kind of see her as being quite relaxed.
Yeah, I remember she came to Chelsea probably
obviously not met her in person.
No, well, she came to Chelsea 2 seasons ago, and it was on press day, and she came over, and the rose, there was a few dead heads on the rose, and I remember David saying, "Quick, Dame Judi Dench is coming, you want to tidy that up." And then the next thing you know, she was stood there, and I didn't know what to do, and I was that nervous, I dropped my secateurs into the plant. And then she sort of said, "Is that my rose?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Oh, there's a few dead heads on it," and I was previously taking them off. But it's just a really reliable rose, and it's not perfect. There's a bit of black spot now and again, and the fragrance isn't outstanding on it, but for me, that just shows what I'm looking for. It
captivates your attention.
Yeah, and as you've said before, it brings me joy. It's the first rose I go and look for in the season. It's the last rose that I'll cut. So
lovely. Really nice. So, again, just to recap, just in case anybody wants to book themselves, you've got bare root courses running from the 1st to the 17th of November.
Yeah.
And you've got pruning workshops starting...
Early January, right up until towards the end of February. So
wonderful. Liam, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
I hope you've enjoyed our chat today.
I've loved it. It's
wonderful.
great.
I'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Take care. I want to thank Liam personally for giving up so much of his time on the Friday that I visited the nursery. It was a real pleasure catching up with him, and I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. Feel free to leave me a comment under this podcast if you have any questions. And don't forget, you can book yourself onto one of David Austin Rose's pruning workshops. They start on the 6th of January and work their way through to the 2nd of March. So if you're not feeling particularly confident on how to handle and prune your roses moving forward, this is a really good way of immersing yourself into the subject and being surrounded by like-minded people. I hope that you've enjoyed today's podcast and this series so far, and I look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Until then, happy gardening.